Thank you, Jesus, for giving us an opportunity once again to come here in the sanctuary and trust God that He has some fresh manna for us this morning, for His word is always truth, that He may help us to go through what He has put in my heart today to help us understand, and especially in the context of where we are as a people, as a nation, and the things that we fight with, the cultural norms of this life, how things have always been done, and what Christ came and paid the price for, that we may be different, we may walk the new walk that He has for us. So you're most welcome, even our online viewers. We don't take for granted that you have tuned in or you have been following us. We really appreciate, and may the Lord bless you wherever you are. So my topic today, I will use an example of a woman in the Bible. You know, there were not very many women mentioned in the Bible, and especially in significant positions. As a matter of fact, as I was looking, I saw that there were only 5 women who are mentioned by name as prophets, and one of the 5 was a false prophet. So this one is known by name as Deborah. We have a lot of teachings about this woman, but I will be addressing or looking at the issue of a model of faith and cultural impact of women in society. So it will be, the topic is a model of faith and cultural impact by a lady or a woman called Deborah. This is in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is the second book after the 5 books of Moses. This is where Israel has now entered into the promised land, and Joshua now is their leader. Just like Moses was, Joshua continued with the assignment, and he completed the assignment of entering into the promised land. But he was elderly as well. Remember, they had all these 40 years of wandering. I'm imagining by the time they were leaving Egypt, he was about 20 or 20-something years old. So at this point, he's fairly, in our context today, around 60 years or something like that of age. But he lived to be 110. So he had another 50 years or so in the promised land. So it is after this scenario now that we are addressing the issue of the book of Judges, because after Joshua then went to be with the Lord after he slept, then there were those who were around him who continued with their assignment, those who were in leadership. They continued with their assignment, but I'm imagining if for the most part some of them were, or maybe one of them was his age mate, that is Caleb. The others were fairly there, and they didn't take much time because they had already started degenerating or degrading their spiritual walk with God. To where we remember when Joshua said, "As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord." It means there were some things that were going there within the community of Israel that were not as it were when it was with Moses. So it's not a failure, but sometimes when people increase and they are encountering other different cultures, remember they were surrounded by the Canaanites. They were surrounded by other nations who had influence in them. Because they would go to war to finish what they had been promised, but sometimes they were not doing what they were supposed to do. And we saw that in the book of Joshua, leading up to the book of Judges, that whatever they were told by God to do, the disobedience had already started. So when they were told, if it is every tribe was allocated a place, so when they were supposed to do what they were told to do, they didn't complete the job. So they had the cultural influences of these people who they had gone to conquer. They had known their gods. They had seen their lifestyles. And some of it were enticing. It's just like in our day today, the world sometimes looks sweeter. You live a carefree life. There are no guardrails in life. So they will be enticing to where if you have to pray 5 days a day and now you're only asked to pray 1 day, then it may be looking like probably that is the best way to go. So there were a lot of influences because of the cultures that they had come into, and that really messed up the people of Israel. because that was not what God had intended for them. But they were influenced, and because of that, the book of Judges is a very good book. If you read all the chapters there, you realize how moral decadence can cause God to bring judgment upon a nation or upon a community, or even in an individual's life. So we shall be looking more so to say, not studying the book of Judges, but looking at the key themes that we have in the book of Judges, where one of the main one was a cycle of sin and deliverance in the community of Israel. So this was where we are seeing that there were judges. Remember they didn't have a king, so they have leaders who had assumed the role of a judge, and a judge then is not like a judge today necessarily, but they had more work to do. Some of them were warriors, some of them were commanders, some of them were people who are going to be leaders in the community. So they were the highest level of authority that God had begun to introduce to them, more so to say that by the time we are coming to Samson, remember there were 12 judges, by the time we are coming to Samson, things were beginning to go the direction of having a king or desiring a king among them. So why? Because they had seen that every time God raised a righteous leader among them, they overcame and God had mercy. But by the time of the end of that judge, if he had fallen from grace and had introduced sin, then they were easily sliding to the sinful nature, and God would bring another army or the Canaanites or the people who are around them to come and conquer them and rule over them. And once you are being ruled, then you become a slave to the master. And then they will be crying again back up to God, and God will have mercy and lift another judge. So by the time we are coming to Deborah, this was the fourth, the fourth judge by this time, because their morality and their ethics were on and off. Every time God would bring forgiveness, they would come back to God, and the leader or the judge would overcome. And by the time that person is coming off the scene, we'll see there are many themes in this. Like I said, it's not a study about the book of Judges, but there were intertwined themes that we will look into briefly as we look at the story of Deborah, because we shall see a lot of insightful things that we can learn about the character of God, the human nature of us as human beings, and the importance of obedience and having faith in what God has called you to do. Remember, Deborah is a woman, we already know that, but by then they never used or to have a lady who is coming to power. So a woman would not lead according to the culture, the cultural context of their day, which is primarily even up to what led up to many years after that. But we shall see that there are many things that Deborah did, despite being in a culture that never embraced to have a woman, especially as a general, a woman who is also a warrior, or maybe for the prophets they had seen a little bit of that, but not very much about what else can a woman do to lead a nation, for example, or a community, or a state. In our context here in America, we have multiple states and a nation as a country. So Deborah is the only female judge mentioned we know in the book of Judges. So, and she's also considered a very prominent and influential judge in the book of Judges because of the many things that she was able to accomplish. One, she was a prophet. She was a prophet because she would hear from God and tell people what God is saying. So she was also a leader. We said earlier that these were the key or primary functions of who a judge was at the time of the book of Judges. So it's not, don't parallel that with what a judge is today, but they were more than that. And she was also a judge who guided Israel over their enemies, who were at this time the Canaanites. The Canaanites were their key enemy at this time, and she went to war with them and had victory over them. So we shall be looking at the book of Judges, chapter 4. Judges chapter 4, and We can read actually from verse 1. Judges chapter 4. Maybe before that, let's just go to Joshua chapter 2. Let's just go to Joshua chapter 2 to put the context of where and where we are going with this story, so that you can see where we are going and how it developed to where we are getting to this. Joshua chapter 2 and verse 7. Verse 7 through 10. These are just about 3 or so, but they will help us understand the context better. Then the men pursued them by the road to the Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who pursued them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof. Is it Joshua chapter 2, verse 7? And let's go to verse 10. Let me see. For we have heard how I lied up the water. No, at the Red Sea. Oh, no, that is the story of when they crossed over. I think I'm mixing up myself there, but it is towards the end of the book of Joshua. Toward the end of the book of Joshua, where we are now seeing how, like I was saying earlier, how Joshua managed to cross over. He has been about 50 years now, and God is calling him to come out of the scene because he's about to go being with the Lord. And from there, it is where we are going to see that there are things that are happening in his life that after he had left, he had not left someone to oversee what he was doing. So by the time he was dying, things were happening in a different way. Oh yes, so Joshua chapter 2, Judges chapter 2 and verse 7. Yes. So the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. So see, all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. So the elders who were with Joshua, after Joshua left, the elders were in position of leadership, who had seen all the great works of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. Verse 8. Now Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years. So we saw he almost reigned for about 50 or so years. And they buried him within the borders of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the mountains of Ephraim on the north side of Mount Gash. Verse 10, when all the generations had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. So for them, the issue of the Ten Commandments, the issue of the story of Moses, it looked like a myth. It is a story told, getting to one ear and getting off the other ear. So you can see a generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. So that was the state of Israel by the time the judges had to come on. And we had Othniel, who was the first one, and the second one, and the third one. So by the time we are coming to Deborah, that's where I wanted us to see what is happening with Deborah in Judges chapter 4. From verse 1, we can read up to 9. Then we will not go back there again, so now we can continue with our story. Judges chapter 4 and verse 1. So we shall see from Judges chapter 4 and verse 1, when Ehud was dead, that was the other judge who was ahead of him, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So this is more or less the story every time when a new judge is coming. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Chapter 2, verse 2. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. So Jabin is a king of the Canaanites who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth Hayogim. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. So you can imagine the Canaanites had a big army, and they were capable and able to oppress the children of Israel. Remember, they were being used as a rod of punishment by God because they had already fallen from grace, from following God. Verse 4. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. So they just took us to the story of how she was already judging Israel. Verse 5. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of, I didn't finish that, in the mountains of Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her, for judgment. So we can see she was a judge. We shall see that. Then she sent and called for Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him,